The future doesn't belong to the busiest leader. It belongs to the one who can see it first. Welcome to The Vision Architect, a podcast how bold visions are created, communicated, and turned into reality. I'm your host, Simon Vetter. Welcome to The Vision Architect, the podcast where we explore the powerful forces that shape successful organizations. I'm your host, Simon Vetter, and I am thrilled to dive into this episode focusing on vision and culture, two essential elements that can make or break any company. Get ready for an enlightening conversation. I'm excited for our podcast today about vision and culture. I have Robert Richman, expert on culture and the author of the Culture Blueprint. He was a culture strategist at Zappos and travels around the world, speaks to organizations and companies about values and culture and how to create great customer experiences. Robert, welcome.
Thank you, Simon. Great to be here.
Culture. Give me a quick overview. What is a culture? How do you define it? And why is it so important?
Yeah, there's a few ways to go about it. One is I really think everybody's a culture expert at heart, because if you think about it, if you've walked into any group of people, a party, a dinner, a company, an event, you get a feel for it immediately. And so that's what it is at its core, is you can tell me your culture is this, or that, but however you feel in the culture tends to predominate whatever that is. So you might feel all kinds of different emotions. So at its core, culture is a feeling. What is it? It's whatever happens in communication between two or more people. That's where culture happens. There's no culture with one person. It's two or more. And then it's a lot of things within there. That's behaviors, beliefs, values, actions, results. All these things are within culture. They're not culture itself. But the biggest factor in any culture, whether that be a group, a tribe, a nonprofit, an organization, a company, is they are held together by two bookends, if you will. And these are the key to defining what's inside the culture. And those two bookends are who we let in and who we kick out. Those are the biggest of the permeable boundary of culture that determines it. Why? Because you can't really control people inside of it. You can guide behaviors, you can reward, you can have consequences, but the biggest two factors are who you let in and why, and who you kick out and why.
So consequently, the two most important things then is hiring and firing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are there any other levers as a leader to shape culture, to influence culture, to build a culture that is more intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, if the company and leaders know their values, that's a great place to start, because once they determine those, actually living them and demonstrating them is very much key. And not just on a one-time basis, but on a regular basis, ideally through rituals. So for example, at Zappos, we had the core value of being humble. And the CEO, Tony, would on the regular serve people food at the cafeteria regularly to be humble like one of the other workers there. So knowing the values of the organization and the leaders to demonstrate them, that's number one, because people will react more to what you do than what you say, especially if those things are out of alignment with each other. So that's the number one thing I would say. But it also comes down to some little things like this is what I found to be kind of one of the key. There's two key differentiators. One is that if you think about what holds a culture together, this took me like 12 years to figure out, that what holds any group of people together is their agreements, and that's any group. And one, that begs the question, are they clear? Do you know what the agreements are? And then do you uphold them? I found that if an organization or group of people is clear on the agreements and upholds them, that's strong culture, right? So the CEO, the leaders are really in charge of understanding what do those agreements need to be. And everything is an agreement, from a job description to a task I give you, to a project, to even agreeing to show up when and where, right? These are all agreements. And so the CEO, I've seen the best when the leaders be masters at this because they understand they need to invite people in. They need to base it on their passions and interests. And they ideally even keep track of them. I remember Tony would keep track of all his delegations that he did, which are essentially all agreements that people made to uphold. And that's the underlying structure within a culture. And if a leader is aware of that, then that can be very, very powerful.
Yeah. And when we set agreements and meet those agreements, then it creates, it's a matter of integrity.
Exactly.
Fulfilling what we're saying and doing. And there's congruence about that. Do you see a difference in industries, in sectors around culture? And if so, what are the differences?
The biggest difference I see with this is it a culture that values team or that values individuals? So for example, with a very sales-driven culture, that's very individual. You need the high performance of individuals with that. Also with a law firm, that's very much independent people working together, right? So those are environments where culture is very, very challenging. Environments where you need a team, have to work together as a team. Something like movie productions, right? You need everybody to come together on that. That's where culture becomes really, really important. And so it's less about a particular industry, though those are examples of them. But at its core, what I've been amazed by, no matter what the group, no matter what the country, there are certain things that work, right? So I don't think you could tell me, is there an organization where you'd say, yeah, we don't keep our agreements, but it's a great culture? I don't think you'd see that. That's a breakdown in trust. So, I tend to see if the word trust comes up, it's usually missing. In your highest trust relationships, you don't talk about it a lot, right? But you talk about it when it breaks down. So these high trust organizations are one that are really clear based on these agreements. And this goes past any type of international or industry type of designations.
Let's talk about the intersection between vision and culture and values. Can you give me a quick definition? And then what is that intersection? What happens when a vision is vague or unclear? And what's the impact on the culture?
Yeah, so the vision I describe as the what. What are we doing here? And the values are the how. These are the ways that we're going to behave to achieve that vision. And ideally what happens with a vision is that it's clear enough that you can A, verify it in reality, and B, see yourself as part of it. So, for example, if you were to say, I'm going to be the best business consultancy in my country or whatever that is, how do you know? How do you know you achieve that? Is there some type of metric that does that? And if there is, can that be achieved in 2 to 5 years? Because if it's longer than that, then a lot of employees will start to leave because they don't have that sense of fulfillment. So I encourage leaders to think about that what. How is it achievable and verifiably achievable? And can it be achieved in 2 to 5 years?
Yeah. You said behaviors are so critical and part of the connection to the values. How do you teach leaders to be clear about the values and be clear about the behaviors and also live up and role model those?
So you can really see the values the way people literally value something. So where do we spend our time, our attention, our energy, our money, these and our language? Where are we really well organized? These are questions to ask to see, because what I believe is that values are always present. Because if it's valuable, it's a value, right? It might not be what you want to value, but the way that you look at, okay, how are we spending our time? How are we spending our money? How are we directing our attention? These are the questions to ask and realize this is not just a crafting process. This is a realization process of where our values currently are, and then consciously deciding if we want to shift them or not.
Right. What are some practical culture building practices? Where would you start? You say kind of let people in, make sure when they leave, and then role modeling. Can you give me a little bit more specifics about strategies, how to build good culture?
Yeah, so there's the micro and the macro. So the macro is really involved in who you let into the organization, right? So making the interview process one that reflects values is absolutely key. So for example, with the high value of service, we would ask, tell me about a time when you helped somebody out when you didn't have to. That's better than saying, do you like to be of service? You don't want to be on the nose. You don't want to go direct. You want to ask questions that show that they value this in their life. That's the macro in terms of bringing people in. In terms of more of the micro, this is this is where I noticed that what connects people together in any culture. Think about this for yourself, even like in any culture, you've got different personalities, different salary levels, different ideas. Even with the visions, people have different relationships to the vision. They might have different interpretations of it. All these things are different. There's only been one thing so far, at least, that I can find is the same for everybody. Because again, people have different budgets, different all kinds of things. But I would say that you and I, we both have the same 24 hours in a day. And we both can agree that right now in Pacific time, it's 8:15 a.m., right? If you were to tell me, no, it's 10:15 a.m. Pacific time, you'd be crazy, right? So how does that help us? Well, if we know that this is a point of reality that we all understand, then we can synchronize everybody according to this reality. So where I see cultures really strong are when they start meetings on time, end on time, and deliver on time. Now think about the contrast of that, where people are just running late. What does that mean? That means they're valuing their individual agendas or even their team's agendas over the company's agendas, right? So what we want to do is show that everybody, because late is subjective, right? You might say late is 2 minutes late. I might say late is an hour, whatever, depending on cultures and countries even, right? But we can all agree what on time means. There's no question of it. So again, agreements. If we can find a point of agreement, and the highest leverage one I've seen is time.
What's another one besides time?
Yeah. So what we found is, and Tony was really instrumental in this, was realizing how much the 4 factors of happiness, as discovered in the field of positive psychology, are really, really important. That if you have these 4, people tend to stay in an organization. If you don't, they tend to leave, right? So those 4 factors are: 1, do you feel like you're making progress? If I'm making progress, I want to make more progress. Second is, do I feel like I'm in control in some way? If I feel like it's random, like John just got a raise, I didn't, it seems really random, I don't have a way to progress, that's when things break down. But if I clearly have a way to, things that are in my control, how I educate myself, the tasks I do, the projects I take on, then I'm happy because I have a sense of agency, agency and autonomy there. The third is having a best friend at work, a relationship, strong relationships with your manager, strong relationships with the best friend there. I don't want to leave my best friend. I don't want to leave a great manager who's there with me, right? And the last is having some sort of purpose that is beyond money, that we have to come together as a team to achieve, that I'm passionate about, that is not just dominating in revenue and profits, right? So these 4 factors: progress, control over progress, great relationships, and having a purpose beyond money. If we have these 4 factors in a culture, then people tend to enjoy it and tend to stay.
So if you're a leader, or if you have work with a HR leader or executive, how do you help this person based on that lead in order to create that high trust, high functioning culture? Where do you start as a coach or as a consultant?
Yeah, a great part is with trust is, 1, figuring it out. Where is it broken down? Was there a broken agreement? Did somebody not fulfill a responsibility, right? That's where trust tends to break down. Or a lack of information. Are we not transparent enough with information? Because if people don't feel like either they're lied to or they feel like they're not getting the right information, then there's a lack of trust there. So how do we build that up? Well, one of the most powerful questions I've found within a culture is to ask somebody face to face, eye to eye, not an email, not in a survey, but asking face to face. You know, if I say, like, let's say even in the situation at the end of this podcast, I say to you, Simon, would you please give me some feedback about that? But that's not the key question. But I start with that. Would you please give me some feedback about how I did? And you'd say, yeah, you were on point with this, and that. And then I say, great. And Simon, would you please tell me what you think I don't want to hear? And now you have the safety to tell me what's really on your mind. And if you have the safety to tell me what's really on your mind and what you're really thinking, then that's going to build up trust, because you feel like you can totally be real and honest. So that's what I recommend.
That's a really good question. Here's the thing: when the trust is not there, people might be a little bit reluctant to be honest. If there's a high level of trust, people feel comfortable and safe. So as a leader, if you ask your direct reports, might they fully be transparent and honest with you?
What I've seen is they are, because if I'm not, I've already defied an order. You're the leader is telling you to do this. And if you don't do this, you did not satisfy the task. Right. So what it does, I've found, is takes a very, very confident leader to be able to ask that question and stay present with it, and also respond to it, not defensively, but to take it in and then make any changes or do anything that needs to be done to shift that situation. But what I found, that first building of trust is really in about hearing people so they feel seen and heard. So, for example, if we start out a new initiative and I don't tell you about it, that's going to be a breakdown. But if I talk to you about it first and I get to hear your opinion and your thoughts, even if I don't use them, you at least felt like you contributed and you were heard. So being heard is absolutely that first step.
Yeah. Goes back to communication. And one of the simple tools of leaders is effective listening. Give people a chance to express what's on their mind. Do you have a company that you work with or know of that has a compelling culture, but also a compelling future and vision?
That's a good question. There are a lot of companies that just, they have a strong culture. I think that the strongest, I'd say, that I've seen is probably the Navy SEALs, because they need to pay so much attention to culture, hiring, firing, communication, all these things, that if they don't, people will die. And when they have a mission, it's very, very clear of what that is and how to achieve it, right? So that's the absolute strongest I've seen. And strong also means what we believe, what we say, and what we do are all in alignment, right? So that is, when I ask audiences or groups, I say, who do you think has the best culture, the strongest? They'll say Google, Disney, Zappos, all these other ones. And I say, no, those are good. Those are strong. But the strongest I've seen is actually the Navy SEALs.
Even sometimes sports teams have a great culture.
For sure.
Winning teams, they have a morale and they have each other's back and they're there for each other and they have a clear purpose. They want to win.
Yeah, that's sports analogies make it definitely easy because the goal is so simple and clear. And I think I don't always mention sports because people will say, oh, that's so simple. I need to get the ball in the hoop, right? But in the corporation, you've got 20 different priorities you're working on and trying to figure that out. And what's even going to be the goal? That's the hard part sometimes, is just even figuring out, like, your work. And what people help people with, right, is what do I do? What is the vision? I've got 20 things I want to do, but if I tell people I'm doing 20 things, they'll do none of them, or just they'll pick ones, right? So that's where it gets harder for companies and organizations, is to really understand and then really articulate what that vision is.
Yeah, and in sports, winning is clearly defined.
Yes.
In business, winning depends on people's interests and different definitions. And so you mentioned companies, they have 20 different priorities. How do you help a company clarify the mission, why we are here and where we're going, that you don't have 20 priorities, you have a few important priorities people understand? How do you narrow that down?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say sometimes there's kind of the soft angle and the harder angle too. The softer angle is where's the most energy? Where do you feel lit up? Where is that yes feeling? And that can sometimes make it very, very clear very quickly. But if you want to be a little more detail oriented or data oriented with it, for example, is you take those 20 or 10 or however many they are, and then you take them each one by one to stack rank them. So, for example, let's say you have the vision to be the best vision consultant, a revenue of this target, a customer service rating of this many people referring you to others, right? So you take each of those and say, for example, is revenue more important than customer score? If you're in a revenue crunch, it is. If you're not, I'd say you probably want to prioritize the customer score, right? But you run each priority against it. And if you do that, then a natural order happens of which is the most winning one that beats the others, right? And so by doing that simple exercise, you can then stack rank the priorities.
What I often see is, for a CEO, one of the most important things is financials. Mm-hmm. Because that's what he's tasked to do by the shareholders.
Well, let's think about this, though. That's what the accountability is, but that's not necessarily the strategy, right? Yeah. That begs the question, what is the strategy? Because like in sports, like you said, every coach needs to win, but they don't keep talking about the scoreboard and saying, score, hey, we're down by 20, we're down by 10. No, that's a horrible strategy. So when CEOs focus too much on the money, without the how, then things go off the rails. And so I think the best example of this was from the book, The Power of Habit. And it talked about Alcoa Steel. And the new CEO came in, was supposed to fix revenue and profitability, and said, you know what we're going to focus on? We're going to focus on safety. That's our number one concern. And people thought he was crazy for not focusing on the revenue and cutting back and things like that. But what happened? By focusing on safety, the employees loved it because they want to live. They don't want to be injured. But in order to be safe, they have to be meticulous and excellent in their practice. And by focusing on safety, which actually generated excellence, the company was able to do a turnaround on revenue and profitability. And not only that, the workers had a mural painted of the CEO because they loved him for saving their arms and legs and lives that way, right? So that's where you could say, yes, money is important, but it can't be the focus as the strategy.
Yeah. I also talk about leading and lagging indicators.
Yeah, I love that distinction. Love
and
that.
Lagging, financials are lagging. What are the leading indicators? And I think safety or customer experience or a good team environment are leading indicators. So totally makes sense. And also within there, you can focus on the values and behaviors and what are the agreements, how we fulfill a great customer service strategy. Yeah. Love that. In your personal life, how do you apply this? Values and behaviors and agreements. How do you apply that in your personal life?
It's a great question. Well, for me, I've definitely found that when I'm on time for things and deliver on time, my life goes well. When I'm late, stress, breakdowns in fulfillments of promises, things like that. So, the practice, not only of being on time, but being early has a very big impact for me. I'd say the second is realizing how much culture is important. And that, I'm especially me, somebody who lives alone, that I need to consciously bring in community, consciously bring people together. And I think that does apply to companies too, where you have to consciously say, we're going to get together once a year, or this is going to be our meetings focused on getting together. This is how we're going to get to know each other and build more. And so I find that I have to do that with that, is consciously pick out times to see people, bring people together, have them over for dinner. It doesn't just happen where 10 people show up at my house for dinner. Right? I need to actually work on that and bring people in and consciously create culture in my life.
Good. Any final advice or any tips for the listeners how to create that amazing culture?
Yeah, I'd say one more thing would be this distinction that I actually learned from the SEALs, which is this idea of hunters and farmers. So a hunter is somebody who really wants to get the thing done and go out and make it happen and do this. And they work like a project, and then they need the next one. Right. And so the way I was described to me was that the SEALs are hunters, but there are 100 hunters supported by 400 farmers. Who are farmers? They're the people who make sure the processes get done, make sure that things keep going. And where I've seen problems go with organizations is you try to turn a hunter into a farmer or a farmer into a hunter. What does that look like? Well, you take your best programmer, for example, and say they're great at programming, which is more of a hunter's job, and let's make them into a manager of the others, which is a farmer's job. And then they don't like it, and then things go off the rails. Or you take a farmer, like let's say a customer service agent, somebody keeping the process going, and you say, you should be more of a hunter. I want you to innovate. I want you to change things. I want you to propose ideas. They don't want that, right? So it's really important to see who is a hunter and a farmer, keeping them in that role unless they really, really want to become one of the others. Then you can work with that. So not trying to force it, and then working with that rather than against the people that you have. That's a key distinction I've seen help companies.
Fantastic. This is wonderful, Robert. Thank you so much for all your examples, insights, and advice. I appreciate that. And I hope we'll connect soon again in person next time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's great to talk to you. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you for joining us on The Vision Architect today. Until next time, I am your host, Simon Vetter, speaker and vision architect. I hope you found this conversation with Robert Richman insightful and valuable for building stronger organizational culture. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more discussions on vision, leadership, and organizational transformation. Check out the show notes for useful links and resources. Keep architecting your vision. Thank you for listening. I am Simon Vetter, and you have been listening to The Vision Architect. If this episode sparked new ideas, share it with someone you care. Until next time, keep keep imagining the future you want to create and start building it.